Good afternoon, students. So today in this class we shall talk about the remaining topics, like where we left. So in last class, I guess we have studied something about the origin of life, and we also spoke about few concepts in evidences of evidences of evolution, and I guess we should start with something called Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. But before starting that, let us understand some concepts in the natural selection. So Charles Darwin, right? So this guy, Charles Darwin, the famous fellow. So this fellow was talking about fitness, right? So he's saying that those animals which are reproductively fit, those animals or those living organisms which are reproductively fit will leave more progeny, will leave more progeny behind, and that's the reason these are selected by the nature. So this is what is told by Charles Darwin, right? And he says that, say for example, if this is one living organism and this is another living organism, this is another living organism. So there are three different living organisms here, right? There are three different living organisms here with different characters. So now condition one, right? So when there was condition one, the first two survived, but the third one couldn't make its way to the next life, which means it couldn't evolve in that condition. So these were not selected by natural selection, whereas the first two were selected. And these two, during the second condition, when there was something else, right? So maybe some temperature variations or whatever. So because of certain variations in the environment, so out of this, now this one did not make to the next level, right? Whereas this one did. So if you see, the process is kind of directional. The process is kind of directional. So there will be different living organisms and they will keep on evolving by various conditions, and that's how they go, right? So according to Charles Darwin, the evolution is directional, right? He said whenever there is some abnormal condition or whatever, so during that condition, the animal will either survive or will not survive, selected or not selected, right? So later on, there was this fellow called Hugo de Vries, 2018, 2019. So there were continuously two questions asked, right, in the consecutive NEET exams last year and this year also, like 2019. So this Hugo de Vries, this fellow, when he was studying a plant called evening primrose, right, evening primrose, he found out there are some sudden changes in the plant, and these sudden variations in the plant, he called them as mutations. Okay. So how did we define mutations? So mutations are random changes in the genome sequences which are inheritable, right? So this is how we define mutation. So when Hugo de Vries was studying on certain plants, he saw some plants have shown some variations and this happened out of blue, which means there was no reagent or nothing. So there were some sudden variations from the previous one to the new one, right? So he didn't realize what exactly the things are, but studies reveal that there are certain sudden changes that are happening to the plant. So which is mutations. So according to Darwin, evolution is a gradual and directional process, but according to DeVries, evolution is sudden and random and directionless. Because, say for example, Darwin did not talk about certain characters which are evolved back again, right? Say for example, if suppose an organism is having a character and during its evolution it lost its character and again such character has reappeared. So the reappearance of certain characters wasn't explained by Darwin's theory, right? Whereas the mutation theory explained such conditions where he said that there are two types of mutations: forward mutations and backward mutations. And forward mutations and backward mutations will talk about the change of character from wild type to mutant and from mutant to wild type. So that's how the forward and reverse mutations are possible. So that's why mutation can happen in any direction and it can happen suddenly, and this will actually lead to a large variation in the population, and this is what told by Hugo de Vries. So if we just look at the timeline, of evolution, we can classify the timeline, or we can classify the events or the theories as pre-Darwinian theories, Darwinian theory itself, and post-Darwinian theory. So we are currently in post-Darwinian era, right, where we talk about several other things other than natural selection and reproductive fitness, right? So we will talk about population genetics, then we will understand what exactly the things are. So let us talk about some events which took place before Darwin and what the theories talk about. So Lamarckism. So Lamarckism is something about use and disuse of organs. Use and disuse of organs. So Lamarck says that if certain organs are extensively used by the organism for several generations, then there is a chance of such organ, right, getting modified slowly. So this was said by Lamarck, and he gave an example of the long necks of giraffe, the long necks in giraffe. Right. So the long necks are because they generally forage on the tall trees, right? They forage on the tall trees, right? So that's why those which are trying to catch the leaves in the top position, right, at the upper branches, so they survived. But the ones with low neck, let us say, the ones with smaller necks couldn't survive because they couldn't eat the leaves on the tall plants, and that's how these are eliminated and these are selected. So this was his argument, but this was disproved. The use and disuse of organ theory was disproved by a fellow called August Weismann, right? August Weismann. So this August Weismann conducted an experiment on rats or mice. Let me say mice. So he conducted experiment on mice, where he took a mice, right, and in such population what he did was he took mice, and out of that he cut the tail of one, right, and he kept one as control. So this is our control rat, and this is our experimental rat. So he cut the tail of this rat, and he mated it, he allowed it to grow throughout its lifetime, right, and he mated it with another tailless rat, right, so he got progeny. So this progeny, right after birth, he cut the tails again. So like that, he did the same thing for this fellow also, but here he didn't cut the tail. So cutting tail is not there, but here he is cutting tail for every generation. So like that, he cut the tail for 20 generations or so on, and he observed certain things. What did he observe? He observed this. There is no change. There is no change in formation of tail. There is no change in formation of tail, which means even after 20 generations, the litter has mice with tails, right? Second, no change in the size of, no change in size or diameter or features, morphological features of tail, no change, which means there is no change happening even though the tails are being cut for 20 generations, which is a good time. At least some change should be seen. If not the whole tail disappearing, at least the length should decrease, or at least the diameter should decrease, or at least the features must change, because these set of rats or these set of mice are not using their tails for 20 generations, which is a good and enough time. So that is what August Wisman says. So use and disuse of organ does not make much difference. Use and disuse of organs does not make much difference, because there are two types of mutations or two types of changes he spoke about, that is the somatoplasmal variations or somatic cell variations, and the other thing he spoke about was the germplasm theory. The germplasm theory talks about, if there are any alterations, if there are any changes or alterations occur to the reproductive cells, or germ cells, then such characters are inherited, or such characters are seen in offsprings. So this was the germplasm theory given by August Wisman, which talks about two plasm. One is somatoplasm, right, that has nothing to do with inheritance, and the other thing was germplasm theory, right, which talks about the reproductive cells and about the changes in the reproductive cells. So when there are certain changes in the sperm or the egg, right, especially the gametes, then there will be change in the offspring that is produced from the such changed or such modified gametes. So this was his argument. So this is about germplasm theory. Later on, several theories, like we spoke, the Hugo de Vries scheme, right? So later on, much advancement has happened in the field of biology, right? So the limitations of your Darwin, of course, Darwin was most successful fellow in saying about evolution, but the thing is, he didn't consider your Mendel, right? So Mendel, who identified something called factors. So had he considered Mendel and made use of such laws of inheritance, probably there could have been a clear picture about evolution even then, which could have been done by the Darwin himself, right? So this is about the theories which came one after the other, right? The pre-Darwinian theories, Darwinian theory and post-Darwinian theory, right? And we understood that evolution is a result of several processes that are happening, and that is proved by your population genetics. So population genetics is nothing but application of certain laws of genetics, right, in the whole population, right, and understanding how the genes are getting inherited or how the genes are getting uh, changed or modified. So that's how the population genetics helps us in understanding evolution, because those are the things, those variations are the actual ones which are responsible for the so-called evolution, right? So whatever the changes that happen in the genes, and that genes which got changed will allow them to adapt to certain environments, and thus there will be something called evolution. Okay, so let us talk about the population genetics, right? And specifically we shall talk about something called Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So what is Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium? So Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium is a state of a population, right? A large population will remain unaffected will remain unaffected unless the evolutionary force acts on it. So this is about Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So what exactly it says is, say for example, there is a population of 1,000 individuals, right? There is a population of 1,000 individuals, and if this population is not at all affected by any evolutionary force. What do you mean by evolutionary force? It could be natural selection. It could be natural selection. It could be a mutation. It could be a mutation, or it could be genetic gene flow, or it could be genetic drift, or it could be gene recombination. So all these are some things which generally introduce variations or simply the evolutionary force, right? So now you can see here, if it was Darwin theory or whatever the theories we spoke about till now, so all these theories have considered one or two factors, but here if you look at the population genetics is kind of considering so many factors, right? And it is explaining how the population dynamics will be, right? How the population will behave according to the force that is being acted upon them, right? So say for example, uh, if any of these forces are acting upon this population, then the equilibrium is not valid or is no more there, right? So then you will call it as the population is in dynamic state, right, where there is a chance of evolution, which means from the actual population you can see some changes happening when the population is dynamic, and that happens when any of these forces act upon the population, right? And let us look at some example and let us understand how we can uh, see the changes appear. So assume, I'll just take a very small example and extrapolate the things to the genes. So say for example, this is one population, and in this there are some individuals, there are some 10 individuals. So with the knowledge from genetics, I'm saying that each character, let us say each character is controlled by genes, and these genes, the alternating form of the genes, we call it as alleles. So which means in a single individual there are two alleles for some character. So now I am taking red as a dominant allele. So these are homozygous dominant individuals. So 1, 2, 3 homozygous dominant. So similarly, another 3 homozygous dominant individuals. let us say. So totally there are 10 fellows, in which 7 are homozygous dominant, 2 are heterozygotes, and 1 is homozygous recessive, right? So this is a population with varied, right, with varied characters, right? So you see the frequency, whatever the alleles are there, the alleles are different. Some are having dominant alleles, some are having recessive alleles, and some are having a mix of the alleles, right? So now let us say I am taking all these alleles, right? I am not considering it as population anymore. I am considering all the genes and I am throwing it in one place. I am throwing it in one place. So now I call this as gene pool. So how do you define gene pool as? Gene pool is the collection of all genes, right, in a population is called as gene pool. So I'm just collecting all the genes here. So you can see here there is no representation of an organism, rather I'm just representing the alleles. So 10 of them, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 16 of them are there, the red ones, and the blue ones there are 4. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Right. So now the collection of all the alleles in a population is called as gene pool. So this is the population with specific set of things, right? And this is the gene pool. So now looking at the frequency of alleles, so what is the frequency of the red ones here? The frequency of the red ones is, out of 20, there are 16 of them. So 16 by 20, right? So that is how much? So it is 4 by 5. I'm sorry. So let us take the probability. Let us take the probability of picking up one allele. So what is the probability of picking up one allele out of 20? So it is definitely, yes. So it is, so 16 by 20, correct? So picking out of the gene pool 20 and pick the pink ones with the probability of 16 by 20, whereas you can pick out the blue ones with a probability of 4 by 20. So this will be around 1 by 5 and this will be around 4 by 5. So you will get certain ratios, that is P and Q, right? So now these are the probabilities of picking up P out of 20, right? Q out of 20. So I'm assigning the P for this pink one and the Q for the blue one. So now I want to pick up two alleles, one pink and one blue. So the probability will be 4 by 5 for pink one into 1 by 5 for blue one. So I can do the reverse also. I can pick the first one first, blue one first and pink one next. So the ratios of picking up two alleles will be 2pq, right? So this is simple probability thing. So what Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium says that if suppose a population in which the dominant allele is P, if the dominant allele is P and the recessive allele is Q, if the dominant allele frequency is P and recessive allele frequency is Q, and if it follows an algebraic expression P plus Q is whole square is equal to 1, P plus Q whole square is equal to 1. So that is P square plus Q square plus 2PQ is equal to 1. Then you can call then you can call such a population is in equilibrium. Such a population is in equilibrium. So now, say for example, when I took this 10 members of population, right, and this 10 populations frequency is equalizing 1, the frequency of the allelic frequency of p square, q square and 2pq is equal to 1. And if I have seen this population got expanded, let us say this population got expanded, and then I have calculated the allelic frequency and I saw some deviation is there, then I can say there is some change in the population. So definitely there could be some evolution happening. Do you understand my point? So if the frequency is maintained the same in population as it grows, then you can call it as equilibrium. And if the frequencies of the alleles are changing as the population is expanding, then you can say that the population is under some evolutionary force and the population is evolving. So that's how population genetics will help us, right? So say for example, how do we calculate this allelic frequency or whatever is simple. It is a simple probability thing. So say for example, in a population, human population, let us say, uh, the color blind people are around 36%. So if the population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, then calculate the percentage of carriers. So assume this is the question. So the question is simple. In a population, colorblind people's percentage is given, and it is said that it is following Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So now we have to find out how many carriers are there in that population. So it seems to be a very simple problem, and of course it is simple problem. So let us look at how we can approach the problem. First of all, it is following Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. So which means p square plus 2pq plus q square is equal to 1. Okay, and what did they give? They gave the affected individuals, which means colorblind individuals. So color blindness is a recessive disorder. So which means they gave us the q square thing. They gave us q square into 100. So q square into 100 is equal to 36%. So q square is equal to 0.36. So q is equal to 0.4. Okay, so if q is equal to 0.4, obviously p is equal to 0.6, because p plus q should sum up to the 1, because we have seen here if p's probability is 0.8, q's probability is 0.2. Okay, so now we have to calculate carriers. So who are carriers? The carriers are, q is 0.6. I'm sorry, 6 are 36. Q is 0.6. So P is 0.4. So now we have to find out 2PQ. So what is 2PQ? 2 into P, that is 0.4, into Q, that is 0.6. So 2 into 0.24, which is 0.48. So the percentage of carriers, will be is equal to 48%. So this is how the problems are asked. Either they will give you the frequency. So when they give parameters like P and Q, then you are supposed to find out P square or Q square. Or when they give parameters like Q square, you have to find out what Q or P is, right? And they will sometimes give you P and Q, and they will ask to find out what is the population size or something, right? So these are quite commonly asked problems on Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. But in NEET, there were no such questions asked till now. They have asked what are the factors that affect equilibrium. Such questions are asked, but not a question related to the ratio and the problem. So, but still I suggest you guys to remember the problem or remember the equation so that you can apply, because it is very simple problem with very simple logic there. Now let us talk about the factors affecting equilibrium. So factors affecting equilibrium. So there are various factors that affect the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The very first is natural selection. So there must be no natural selection. So if natural selection is acting, so then there will be certain changes. So first of all, natural selection shouldn't act on it. Second thing, the gene flow. So gene flow is basically because of migrations. So when there is a one population, and when few fellows of this population move to the other population, and the characters of this population, the population 1, are expressed in population 2, then you can say some of the genes from population 1 have been migrated to population 2. So that's what gene flow is. So gene flow arises because of migrations, right? And this gene flow will definitely change the frequencies, allelic frequency, because some genes are moving out of the population. So gene flow will cause some variation in the frequencies, and thus the equilibrium is lost. And next, we can talk about your drift, genetic drift. So what is genetic drift? So genetic drift is simply defined as change in genetic frequencies, change in genetic frequencies due to any random event, due to a random event, right? So let us say, let us go back to this example and let us understand, or let us assume that there was one natural calamity, there was one natural calamity, and it was found that all the individuals which are marked in white are lost because of some natural calamity, right? So there was some natural calamity and all the individuals are lost except the pink ones. So now if you just see, and if I take these 4 fellows and I try to collect the genes, now I can just see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right? I can see 8 dots, and that too I can see only the pink dots. So which means there is no more P or Q. It is just P, that's all. Q is equal to 0, which means the algebraic expression will not be followed, which means the gene frequencies are not maintained, which means there is a chance of evolution in this population. So now you don't see the recessive character anymore. The recessive character is lost completely, right? So such random events which lead to the genetic changes or the frequency changes is called genetic drift, right? And sometimes what happens is, let us take the similar example, assume that pink dot and blue dot thing. So you had around 10 individuals there, in which 2 are heterozygotes and 1 is recessive. Assume that these 3 fellows, right, somehow assume that these 3 fellows moved out, right? They moved out of the population, right? And now they started reproducing within themselves. And after some time, there was some population established with different frequencies. So there was some population established with different frequencies. So such establishment of new population and change in the frequencies, right? The change in the frequencies arised by a population which move out, right? And establishes a new population. Such changes are generally called as founder effect. So such genetic drift is called founder effect, because the people who had moved here, the heterozygotes and the recessive population, is establishing a new population. And now this new population gene frequencies will be different. Gene frequencies will be different, and the original population's gene frequencies will also be different. Why? When the migrations are happening, all the recessive alleles are also going out. You're getting my point. So the P plus Q whole square thing is no more valid for both the population, and this new population which is established is because of this someone called founders, right? Who are founders? The one who moved out are called founders, and such change in frequency because of such founders is called as founder effects. Whereas the change which we spoke about previously, because of a natural calamity, if some small population is left and that population establishes a new population, then you call such population as, or then you call such effect as bottleneck effect, because these are the only left species in the population and they are going to establish a new population. So that's why this is called as bottleneck when a natural calamity is destroying, and this is called as founder effect because the founders are moving out and establishing a new population. Okay, so this is about Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. And of course, in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, there should definitely be random, there should be no random mating. Random mating, if it occurs, let us say, if random mating occurs, then there are chances of recombination. And if chances of recombination is there, then there is change in frequency. So now you can understand there is no such population until and unless it is extensively large or immensely large population. There is no population which is not affected by any of these factors. Some or the other factor will affect the population. So that's why slowly the equilibrium is lost and slowly the population will evolve with respect to certain genes, right? So that's how the evolution actually moves. Okay, so this is about the theories of evolution and whatever related to Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium and so on. So there are three different types of natural selection. One more question, natural selection types. So the natural selection is of three types: the disruptive selection, there is disruptive natural selection, and the second one, the directional natural selection, and third one, the stabilizing natural selection. Important for Ames, I can say was important for Ames, or several times it was asked in Ames, right? And this questions are mostly diagram based. They will give you a graph and they will ask you which type of natural selection is it. So disruptive is when the population towards extremes is established because of the change of conditions. Directional is when the mean character or when the mean peak changes with the change in selection force. And stabilizing is when the mean population gets stabilized and the peak becomes narrower. So these are the three types of natural selections, right? And there are different examples. Say for example, infant weight. So you can see babies between 2 to 4 kgs are quite commonly, quite common, right? And people with less than 2 kgs or more than 4 kgs, the survival rates are less, right? So you can see the natural selection is favoring the babies with adaptive weight, that is 2 to 4 kgs. We can take example of melanism, industrial melanism, like conditions before, after, before evolution, before industrial revolution, you saw black population less. After industrial evolution, you saw white population less, right? So like that, there are two cases, before and after. So in the before case, the mean population was white. In the after case, the mean population was black, like that. So the disruptive selection, you can take the wing colors of butterflies, wing color of certain species of butterflies, right? So several mean characters will be there, or more than one character will be stabilized, right, in disruptive, not the mean character, but the characters towards the periphery. So these are the different modes of natural selection, and that's about natural selection. So after this, there are two concepts. One, the chronology, the chronological events, right? So when we generally classify the years, uh, with units, we take it as million years ago, and there are different eras, right? So there are different eras with respect to that, and these eras include your Cenozoic, right? Cenozoic, Mesozoic, and Paleozoic eras. And these eras are further divided into periods, right? Periods like Devonian period, Silurian period, Jurassic, Triassic, etc. Right? So there are several periods which are given in your textbook. So I just suggest you guys for a small homework, so you can do this by yourself. So what you have to do is, you can just uh, take your textbook and you can just see what are the different uh, eras, and what are the different periods, and which was the prevalent organism at that time. Okay, so you just write a chronology, right? Like which was the first one, which was next. Like say for example, if you talk about animals, so first there were aquatic forms, right? If we talk about the vertebrate evolution, first there were aquatic forms, right? The anathostomes. So slowly the anathostomes were lost and the gnathostomes evolved. And in the gnathostomes, you saw this tetrapod evolution, right? So then came the tetrapods with 4 limbs. And in that tetrapods, amphibians, right? So in amphibians, initially there were aquatic amphibians, and slowly aquatic amphibians uh, gave rise to the other amphibians, and then you got reptiles on earth. And reptiles, for their characters like uh, dry skin and resistance to high temperatures and so on, they survived for longer duration, and they almost ruled the earth for several generations. And their exceptional big size, the exceptional big size of reptiles had favored them in several ways, but the unprecedented events took place in the end of tertiary period, right after this Jurassic period. The extinction of dinosaurs and all those took place, right? They extinct towards the beginning of Cenozoic era. And once the dinosaurs were lost from a common ancestor, right, from a common ancestor like synapsid ancestor. From a synapsid ancestor, there were mammals which developed. And once the mammals came onto the earth, mammals, because of their capacity and because of their brain size and because of their uh, what do you call, the response to stimulus and the centralization of their nervous system, they actually took over the earth very quickly, right? And there are several mammals now on Earth. So like that, mammals came. So there is a kind of chronology. And before amphibians, there were only fishes, but there are few fishes which came to land and went back to water, right? So the good example is your coelacanth. The coelacanth fishes are this type of fishes, but they saw this coelacanth was extinct. But in some excavations recently, in some South Africa or somewhere, so they found this coelacanth, so which is actually a link, which is a link between amphibia and fishes. And later on, there were some animals called lobe fins, right? So the lobe fins, which evolved into which evolved into the first amphibian that lived both land and water. So like that, there are various examples and there are various characters, right, which are given in your textbook. So please do one nice homework so that you can put everything on one table so that they will help you. And the amount of questions that were asked from this region are quite less. So it's not mandatory, but because it is in the syllabus and because there are few important points like the connecting links, the missing links, so on, right? So which is of course related to your animal kingdom as well as the evidences of evolution. It's better once we look at the names of various living organisms, right? So this is about the chronological events, right? So the total evolution that has happened. So we already did one chronology previously. We did that chronology of the acellular fellow first, and then came the cellular prokaryote, then came the prokaryotes, anaerobic ones, cyanobacteria, aerobic, like that. So you can draw evolution for plants also, like the chlorophyll ancestors, like cyanobacteria members, and from that eukaryotic fellow came, and from there uh, came the algae, and slowly from algae and by some variations caused, you got the bryophytes, pteridophytes, and most of the pteridophytes were extinct in some Mesozoic era, and this led to the formation of fossil fuels and so on. So like that, there is a chronology for plant evolution also, right, through different geological periods. And the vertebrates also evolved with respect to the geological period. So you please try to look at the names and look at the events happened with respect to the eras and periods, right? So now let us talk about evolution of man, one last concept in evolution chapter. So about 15 million years ago, right, some 15 million years ago, so there were two fellows, Dryopithecus, and Ramapithecus, Dryopithecus and Ramapithecus. And out of these two, so some walk like gorilla and chimpanzees, right? So which was the Dryopithecus, whereas the Dryopithecus was more like ape, whereas Ramapithecus was more like man. It is more like a man. And from there, slowly, the changes has happened with the help of the fossils that were discovered. We found out that the first hominid or the most uh, man-like primates, right, were first seen in Eastern Africa, right? So in Eastern Africa, around 3 to 4 million years ago, we have seen such fossils. I mean, the age of the fossils were found to be uh, 3 to 4 million years ago, and it was about 4 feet height, so very short, but upright individuals which walked upright. And later on in the later stages, the Australopithecus. So this was found, right? And this was quite different from the fellows, and it was believed that these fellows hunted. They hunted with weapons, especially the stone weapons, and they were fruit eating fellows, not meat eating, right? Meat eating was not yet found. And later on we have seen some members like Homo habilis, right? So Homo habilis, the brain capacity being 650 to 800 cc, and these fellows also did not eat meat, right? Then came the Homo erectus. Homo erectus is believed to ate meat, so the Homo erectus came. So Homo erectus ate meat and the brain capacity was around 900. And later on, the Neanderthal man, the brain size increased to 1400 cc, and they used to cover their bodies with skin, animal skin and so on. And then around a million years ago, there was uh, Homo sapiens. So from after Homo erectus, between Neanderthal and after that, Homo sapiens. And Homo sapiens are someone with a brain capacity close to 15, right? That is almost equal to the Homo erectus. And they arose, right? They learned agriculture. So several changes happened, right? And that's how there was a evolution and civilization, so on and so forth took place, right? And this is about origin of man or evolution of man. So the important things here are one, again the timeline. So like Ramapithecus, and then this Australopithecus, then came Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Neanderthal, and then Homo sapiens. Okay, so this is the chronology. And the second type of question, or the previously asked question, was 2019 question, the brain capacity. The brain capacity. So I think we have discussed this already, the brain capacity. And we can expect something like this year. So maybe, right, what I am expecting or what we can expect is the characters. The characters of the variants existed. Like say for example, Australopithecus ate fruits. Homo habilis was also vegetarian. Homo erectus is believed to be the first meat-eating fellows. Neanderthal were the ones which covered with hides, animal hides and so on. Australopithecus knew hunting. They knew hunting, they hunted with stone weapons. Right, so like that, we may expect a question like that from origin and evolution of man, because every year there is one question definitely asked from this portion or this concept. So that's why I'm telling you. So please do read it thoroughly. And yeah, that's all about evolution. So I'll keep the session open for doubts. You can ask. What is the difference between ontogeny and phylogeny? See, there is this fellow, right? So Ernst Haeckel. Ernst Haeckel gave a theory called ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. So which was a disproved theory. So the theory says that whatever the selection, evolution stages are there, right? Say for example, amphibia came first, then reptiles, then apes, then birds, and then mammals. So this is the chronology of evolution of animals, right? So there are embryonic stages. the embryonic stages are there. So the embryonic stages is about the fetal stages, right? So what are the different stages while in development, right? So this stages has this blastomia stage, and then there will be fetus growth, right? So then the fetus will become like this. So there are some changes, right? So this is what ontogeny is. Ontogeny refers to the developmental stages. So what this fellow said is, so during the embryonic development, there are certain stages which resemble each of the phylogenetic stage, right? So like you were in first trimester and so on so week, so you will look like a bird because you came from birds, and before that you look like a reptile, so that's why you came from reptile. So like that, he said the ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, which is a disproved theory, right? So it is false and it's no more valid. It was just a hypothesis or a disproved hypothesis. See, the use and disuse of organs, you cannot apply it to vestigial organs. The evolution of vestigial organs is completely different. So no, you can't say that use and disuse of the evolution of vestigial organs is different. So you can read it, you will understand the difference. What Thomas Malthus said, what did he say? See, Thomas Malthus also spoke about this population. So Thomas Malthus was also studying or observing certain populations and changes in the populations. So his population studies influenced Mr. Darwin, and he said that in a population there are different individuals with different reproductive fitness, and he said the one with good reproductive fitness or one with the greater reproductive fitness which can leave more progeny behind will be selected. So yeah, so that's all about Thomas Malthus for us. What are connecting links? Yeah, I just told you connecting links or whatever is certain organisms which share uh, both the characters of two different animals, right? So two different stages. Like say for example, you can see certain organisms like Neoplena, like I have mentioned one example, Neoplena. So Neoplena is a mollusk, but it has certain characters like segmentation, which is a character that is from annelids. So like that, it's a connecting link between Annelida and Mollusca, right? So those are connecting links. There are several such connecting links, like say for example, your coelacanth can be considered as a connecting link between the Pisces and amphibians, right? Lobe fins can also be considered like that. So yeah, those are different connecting links. Is founder effect due to gene flow? See, gene flow and founder effect are quite different. The genetic drift is different and the gene flow is different, but both of them will contribute for deviation in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Again, the same question, Coser weights I have told already. So Coser weights is about the pre-organic or the prebiotic soup, right? Whatever the soup that was there before the earth was, before the living organism formed, right? So that's the Coser weights, right? And I also told protobionts are the first acellular forms which were formed out of those organic matter. Okay then, so that's all for today's class. Thank you all. So hope you do that assignment and do practice some questions on various concepts. So I'll head back to you tomorrow with the next chapter, human health and disease. Thank you.